What's up, guys? Andy here, and today I'm going to talk about a very important, arguably very controversial subject matter, which is intermittent fasting. Okay, I'm recording this video in conjunction with an article I've just written for healthing.ca. I'll put that in the link in the description if you'd like more elaboration on the thoughts that I'm presenting in this video. Realistically speaking, I mean, for a 4 or 5 minute video, whatever this ends up being, that's not really enough time to broach this topic. But what I'm going to try and do here today is present you my thoughts on intermittent fasting as if you were a client of mine, as if we were having an honest discussion about whether or not it's something you should care about, you should pursue, you should be enamored by, whatever the case may be. Okay, so I have a joke that intermittent fasting is kind of like how often you should text someone back, every 16 hours during the week and a little bit longer on weekends. And that ends up being the form that most people do, that cliche 16 to 8. And that's the first area that we have to cover, is that fasting really is like a word that really encompasses a bunch of different activities. Like it could, in its most innocuous form, amount to nothing more than skipping breakfast, 16-8, eating from 12 to 8. And then its more extreme forms could involve, going multiple days without eating. And, my sense is that it's a very small percentage of people who are on that end. So I'm not really going to be speaking to that population today. I'm more so going to speak to whether or not kind of the average person should really try to bend over backwards to do a 16 or 18 or 20-hour fasting window, and what that really ultimately entails and what the practical and scientific considerations are. Now, I'm not someone who champions fasting. Certainly, I agree with my colleagues, and what dietitians have said when surveyed is that fasting is the most popular diet trend of 2022, and it has surpassed the keto diet, which makes perfect sense, to be perfectly honest, because the ketogenic diet, as I've written about previously, I haven't made a video on it yet because I know that's going to incite all sorts of hatred or whatever. But the keto diet really doesn't really allow you to eat many of the foods that exist. Intermittent fasting doesn't really make any claims about that. It just puts let's say brackets around the time you eat. So from that perspective, it's more innocuous for most people. And that gets to the next point. I'll say it right off the bat, guys. If intermittent fasting does not represent an improvement in your quality of life, if you have a tumultuous relationship with food, if you have high energy needs, should you really be engaging in fasting? The evidence of any benefit is not nearly sufficient enough to justify you bending over backwards to do fasting. This is my viewpoint, okay? Now, that's not to say that for the right person, an intermittent fasting framework could improve their quality of life. It could improve their dietary pattern. You know what I mean? The evidence is mixed. There are studies that show, yeah, maybe it improves insulin resistance. Studies that show that doesn't really do anything much. And so for me, when the studies are mixed like that, it really does come down to the individual. So the first thing you need to know, and my stance is that it is not valuable enough to justify taking away from your quality of life. So if you're looking from the outside and you see your friends doing intermittent fasting and you feel compelled or intrigued by it, just know right away, if that works for them, cool. But if it doesn't speak to you, you don't need to be doing that stuff. What you eat, the totality of your dietary pattern, your mental health is always going to be more important. So let's throw that out there to start, okay? So that aside, let's then talk about the two aspects of fasting that I like to consider, the practical aspects and then the scientific or theoretical aspects, right? So from the practical perspective, the 16-8 fast just really involves, going 16 hours from your last bite one day to your first bite the next. For some people, they love that framework. They thrive with it. Cool, no problem. One thing I will say from the practical perspective is you have to be careful of one thing. If you're of the mind that you're going to start skipping breakfast, that you're going to start skipping meals, be aware that there are certain very healthy foods that are generally only consumed at that time of day. Nuts and seeds, avocados, let's say yogurt, eggs, fruits. So if you're omitting those foods as part of some sort of fasting protocol, you need to make sure, for the most part, especially stuff like nuts and seeds and fruit, that you're getting those things elsewhere. Because if you're going to omit them at breakfast and then not make up for them, then fasting is not serving you as well as it is. That's point number one, okay? Conversation about the science. And the science is not fully hashed out. I mean, there's a lot of animal studies that with results that haven't really been fully replicated in human studies. There are some intriguing studies in humans, you know what I mean? And so there's an article rather out of the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a very famous journal, that basically said fasting does two things for the body, okay? It kind of induces what's called a cellular stress, So essentially what that means is like intermittent fasting, like going without food for a bit, it's like a low level of stress on the body that ultimately makes your body more resilient. Now, we're yet to fully quantify that in human studies, right? And what that really entails and what that means in the long term. But that's one theory. The other theory is metabolic switching, which means that when you engage in intermittent fasting, and you go for a while without eating, your body has to become more adaptable to switching between carbohydrate and fat as a fuel source. Okay? Again, the long-term implications of that, and if that's really something that is happening in a meaningful way with a meaningful positive effect, that's yet to be determined. But those are two of the big arguments. Some other studies I've seen regarding fasting, I've seen a study that demonstrated that a 14-hour daily fast can upregulate some genes that actually reduce Alzheimer's risk. I've seen some evidence that in studies of people who work out fasted, that causes some changes in the metabolism, in the mitochondria. Whether or not that's actually meaningful, we don't know. Keep in mind as well that fasting before a hard exercise of greater than 60 minutes is actually probably not a good idea. That's also based on evidence I presented in the article, linked in the description. So there's some things here, okay? And really my take-home message is the following. Intermittent fasting for the right person, it's a cool protocol. My view is, and I tell my clients, that it's never going to be more important than the totality of what you eat and your mental health. So please keep that in mind. Please don't look to it as some sort of silver bullet. I really, it makes me, as a health professional, I talk to so many people and it makes me sad when people look at things in that way. It's a cool tool for the right person. We need more evidence on it to really make strong claims. Other than that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I tried to be honest and candid about my views. And other than that, nothing else to say. Have a great day.